Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by Adrian Kearney from FutbolShirtalia, and they think kits all over. I always get that wrong. How are you doing, mate? Thanks very much for coming on.
No, that's brilliant. I always love it when some of our other Celtic partners have to read the line. They think it's all over. We got a Scottish guy on the podcast. We can never actually get him to say it. But I'm Adrian FutbolShirtalia. I'm a quarter of They Think It's All Over podcast.
Look, Adrian, thanks very much for coming on tonight to discuss this club. I know that it's one that you were particularly keen on talking about, just to give your knowledge about the situation. But before we get stuck into things, how have things been going with you recently? It's been a wee while since we last spoke, actually. It just kind of crossed my mind there. Been some time since we last caught up. So, yeah, how have things been going?
Yeah, it's been a little while. It's been good fun. We've had some great guests on. Highs and lows in terms of the emotional stories they come out with. We've had some great stuff with some former players, Alexi Lalas, and current players like Connor Washington going out recently. It's been good fun, but yeah, it's going well. We're just enjoying what we're doing, like you guys do.
Yeah, well, that's it. At the end of the day, man, that common saying always goes, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So you guys are testament to that. I mean, brilliant, the kind of content that you guys put up. Half the kits that I see on there I would never have known existed unless, if I didn't follow your page, and I've ended up buying some of them as well. So I think that kind of speaks for itself, the amount of exposure that you give, not just to the top clubs bringing out some great kits, but also like smaller clubs as well, and the types of kits that they bring out. It's become quite a trend recently. And some clubs have developed a bit of a club following because they've realised they can really capitalise on this new wave of kit collecting. And, if they bring out a cracking kit themselves, and they know it's going to bring in some amount of revenue. So that's been brilliant as well. And you guys do amazingly in accounting for that and kind of spreading the word about these kits. So urge all of our followers to go and check out FutbolShirtalia and They Think Kits over on X, because there's really brilliant stuff that's going out there. But today we are going to be talking about Palermo FC from Italy. Quite a controversial club in terms of how their demise came about and eventual revival. There's quite a lot of conjecture and a lot of controversy around it. It makes for a really good story, to be fair, but it is quite interesting from a heritage perspective as well, of course, and I suppose it kind of plays into this kind of dynamic and environment that exists within Italian football when clubs end up going bust and reviving. It's become a bit of a commonality, so we'll dig a little bit deeper into that as well. But we'll just kick things off from the very beginning. There's actually a little bit of uncertainty over the actual founding year of Palermo FC. Some people say that it was founded in 1897 by the eventual founders of Palermo FC, or what would become Palermo FC. Others say that it was founded in 1898 by an Englishman called Joseph Whittaker, or he created an early incarnation of the club, or another unrelated Palermo sports club. But the most accepted, I suppose, account of the club being founded was in 1900 by a colleague of Joseph Whittaker. His name was Ignazio Maio Pagano, and it was founded as Anglo Palermitan Athletic and Football Club. So, just from the off, we already know that a lot of Englishmen and Scotsmen took the game around the world. Italy was one of those places, and I suppose Palermo wasn't exempt from that trend, was it, Adrian?
So Palermo in particular, I'm not sure back at the founding, but in terms of calcio and football being founded in Italy, massive links. I mean, the oldest club in Italy is Genoa, and they were founded by James Richardson, an English guy. Milan were founded by English founders. Palermo, I believe, were founded by English founders. So, listen, Italy's got very rich football heritage, but I think there's enough history and facts to suggest that it was the British that took the game across to Italy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in what you said. The heritage of the English influence on calcio or Italian football is really strong, and it's going to be the same in other parts of the world as well. The same as Scottish people, the Scottish professors like Alexander Watson Hutton in Argentina, etc., etc. And cricket clubs played a huge role in that as well. I mean, that's something that we'll hopefully be covering in the podcast another time. But one of the biggest English imports, of course, was cricket, and when they couldn't play in the winter months, then they adapted football over in the UK, and that's kind of where this trend starts and the snowball effect begins, where they start taking it all over the world. But with Ignazio Maio Pagano founding Palermo, they eventually became a kind of sporting institution, I suppose, and he actually brought knowledge of football from London, where he stayed, back to Sicily for Palermo. So again, there's this English influence. You've got, on one hand, it was founded by an Englishman, but on the other hand, it was founded by someone who actually went over and watched the game in London and took it back over. So there's that kind of dynamic as well. It's in two different parts. Quite an interesting wee point there. Their first game came against an English amateur side. That was on the 13th of December 1900, and sadly they lost 5-0. Now, the English amateur side, it's a bit unknown who they actually were. Probably the likelihood is that because, you know, you had a lot of English sailors and going around different docks at that point in time, the likelihood is that they would have stopped in at port and organised a game against them. Probably just the same as like a bounce game or a scratch game or something like that. It's not really very well known who that English amateur side actually were, but if you read Origin Stories by Chris Lee, fantastic book, he talks about this trend again. And again, this was very common, where loads of English sailors would basically be stopped in at a dock. They'd have a football team that were the boat, based on their, you know, that was kind of their identity, was the boat, and then they would play against different teams that they came up against. So likelihood is it was probably one of those teams from a sailing ship. But the first official game was a 3-2 win over Messina, who I believe alongside Catania are the three sort of main football clubs on the Isle of Sicily. Is that right?
Yeah. So Messina, northeast Sicily, the closest port to mainland Italy. Catania on the south of the island. Yeah. But they're the three sort of powerhouses in Sicily, effectively, in terms of football.
Good to know. Two other clubs that I'd like to dig into a little bit more as well. I think, well, as far as I'm aware, Sicily, a little bit like Sardinia, has this identity surrounding it. Perhaps not as strong as Sardinia. I know that they've kind of got an identity onto their own, especially, you know, when compared to the rest of mainland Italy and some of the other island nations. But I'd like to think there's some similarities there. But in 1907, the Anglo Palermitan Athletic and Football Club changed their name to the Palermo Football Club. It was hyphenated, but it was the first instance of them being known as Palermo FC, if you like. And they also changed their club colours to the pink and black that they're known for today. But I'm not too sure if this is a competition that you'll have heard of, but there's quite sort of interesting links, again, to Britain with it. But up until World War One, they actually played in a competition called the Lipton Challenge Cup. It was kind of a new one for me, to be honest. Is it a competition that you are familiar with at all, Adrian?
I am not, but the colours is an interesting one, because there's a couple of I think there's what's now accepted as the true story about why they changed their colours, and then there's a folklore story, because they played in red and blue originally, didn't they, until 1907?
Yeah, red and blue. That's right. I mean, it's like every club has this kind of like folklore aspect to it as well, don't they? In some clubs, it's more unknown than others, depending on the records that still exist. So tell us a little bit more about this folklore story, because I don't think it's one that I've heard before myself.
So the folklore story, which I think was actually probably accepted as true till certain documents were uncovered recently, was that they had a white kit and a red kit, and they went in the wash together, and out came a pink kit. I mean, that's as basic as you get, and because it really is that basic. But when the club started putting together a museum and talking about the history of the club, they actually uncovered a letter that was written by a Count Giuseppe Arioli, I think is how you pronounce it. And he actually wrote a letter to the founder of the club, the English guy you mentioned earlier. What was his name?
Joseph Whittaker.
Yeah, so they uncovered a letter by this count, writing to Whittaker saying, actually, I think that the colours pink would look brilliant for Palermo, because it's the colours of sad and sweet, which represents the emotions of supporting this football club. So, and there's documentary proof of that in the museum in terms of a letter. So that's the real story, apparently.
Wow, that's actually really cool. I always love it when wee details like that surface, just because someone's found a document or a letter that maybe hadn't previously been read or something. Was that a fairly recent discovery that you said for the club opening their new museum?
So I think it's fairly recent, because I mean, even sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I almost I did believe this naive story that is about kids getting washed up, but no, they uncovered a letter, and effectively it's documentary proof that this is what happened, and it took them a long time to get the colour pink. So they agreed to play in pink, but you couldn't get pink cotton or threads in Italy or in South Europe, so they agreed they were going to wear pink, and they had to wait another 6 or 7 months for actually the material to arrive from England. So it wasn't until like 1908 when they found a supplier that could actually produce pink kits. But the colours did change a few times thereafter, but that's when they first wore pink.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting just to hear that. I know that's where it came from, and as you kind of touched on earlier as well, it would have been quite difficult for clubs to get that sort of colour and those kind of dyes in those times as well. So I think it just kind of goes to show how much of a force they actually were within Sicily, and the amount of connections they had that they were able to get that colour, more or less. But just to go back to the Lipton's Challenge Cup, it was actually a Scotsman who created that trophy, Thomas Lipton, who was from the Gorbals in Glasgow and famously founded what would become Lipton's Iced Tea, which is quite interesting as well. But that was contested by Palermo and Napoli, who were known as Naples FBC at the time. It was played once a year, and it was a little bit of a to and fro between the two clubs, basically. So a bit of an early tournament that Palermo played in as well, and because you're obviously kind of crossing the sea to do it as well, there's just quite an interesting dynamic both to both southern Italian clubs. So there's that kind of going on as well, and they would have contested that trophy. But Thomas Lipton donated the Lipton Challenge Cup to Palermo and Napoli, and he also donated the Coppa Lipton Trophy, which was contested between Argentina and Uruguay between 1905 and 1922, I think. So he'd done a couple of things for the development of football across the world, which I found was quite interesting. But in 1919, the club started again after World War I under the name Unione Sportiva Palermo. That was by a committee of university students and sportsmen. They competed in what I think was a regional football tournament called the Campionato Liga Sud, football league in southern Italy. So, it's going to be quite regionalised at that point, especially for clubs further down the divisions. So it's understandable we'd play in a league like that. But in 1927 they dissolved and then reformed a year later by merging with Vigor Palermo, and they took the name Palermo Football Club without the hyphen this time. It eventually reached Serie A in 1932, and that was the year that they also relocated to a new home, wasn't it?
Yeah, just an interesting thing about this period of history, because that was obviously when Mussolini was on a rise, and actually the club's colours changed from 1936 to 1940 when Mussolini basically enforced that all teams represent their regional colours. So they went away from pink, and the flag, the sort of like the regional flag of Palermo, has got that eagle on it that you recognise on most of their badges, but it's set against a red and yellow half and halves background, and actually they had to play in red and yellow during most of these years where actually they were experiencing some of their biggest success at the club. They weren't in pink at the time.
Yeah, it forced a lot of teams to change their names and the names of their stadiums as well, change their colours because he said it was too close to communism or it represented socialism too much, so he forced them to change them basically.
Because did Inter Milan have to wear all black or something during that period or something like that?
Yeah,
no stripes.
red was allowed.
Yeah, something like that. Or AC Milan, sorry, of course. Yeah. But it was for a very, very odd period. Yeah,
really horrible period of time, like awful period of time, obviously, for so many people across Europe, Italy, Spain, Germany, Poland, Hungary, just absolutely terrible, the types of things that these people would have saw during the rise of fascism in these different countries. I mean, as I said, Mussolini would have forced the teams to change their names, their colours, their stadium names, if they were too reminiscent of communism or socialism, because of obviously he perceived them as the greatest threat to his regime. It was a horrible time for people to live under, but again, it was reflected everywhere. Like, I think Bayern Munich had a swastika in their kit badge or something like that.
Yeah, and I've got a friend who's a really one of the guys that does a podcast with me, Gets All Over, is a big Bayern Munich collector. And I believe, they were effectively the Jewish club, and it was imposed on them. It was do this, or obviously there were very bad alternatives to disagreeing with what the regime was doing, right? So yeah, they had to do that, otherwise risk like really bad stuff.
I mean, another Chris Lee book, The Defiant, which just came out, read it very recently. He goes through, it's called The Defiant: A History of Football Against Fascism, and he talks about what happened to these clubs during under fascism in Germany and Italy, and how people resisted it. It's a fantastic read, so I highly recommend it to you guys and to our listeners as well, because just on what we're talking about just now, it gives a much better insight than we ever could into that side of things. So please do go and pick that up. It's a fantastic read. But to get back to Palermo and what they were up to, they took a few years to find their bearings in the league, and eventually they finished 7th, which is pretty respectable, but they were eventually relegated to Serie B again, and their stint in Serie A, it's told, was largely due to the goal-scoring exploits of one of their midfielders, who was called Aldo Borel. Not too sure if it's a player that you've come across before. I think, we're talking about the 30s or 40s, and it's quite difficult, and it can be quite difficult to find records and any evidence or newspaper clippings about these players. So, but he was known as being a goal-scoring midfielder and very much helped them during their stint in Serie A at that time. After relegation, they finished 7th for 3 consecutive seasons, which is at least consistent. And they kind of consolidated themselves as a staple Serie B side during that time. And then we enter the World War II period. That's when leagues are stopped. Kind of, some are broken up into regional leagues. Players are conscripted. It becomes a bit more difficult to track these leagues and these players.
This is a massive bone of contention in Italy, because obviously there's a team just recently relegated from Serie A, Spezia. They still carry the trophy of winning the Italian league at the time, but they were a team of firefighters, so they were never conscripted to go and fight in a war. They stayed around. They still had effectively a full strength team to continue playing in the league and the tournament throughout the war years, whereas other teams are obviously decimated. Yeah, you'll notice any Spezia kit you see, you'll notice they've got the tricolour badge with that cup on, and they're very proud of the fact that they managed to be the best team in Italy with a full strength team, whilst every single other team wasn't full strength. I mean, you can see it both sides of the coin. If that was the team we supported that won, being the best team in the country, we'd probably be celebrating it. But at the same time, there's a big social backdrop to that story to say that actually, not really merited.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with a lot of titles and cups that were won in the interwar years, is that you do need to put an asterisk next to it, because there's so many other factors going on around it that influence that cup win.
My team in England, Swindon Town, and we won League Two during the COVID years. Got an asterisk next to it. I'm 100% counting that as winning League Two.
Fair enough. If Swindon won the league then I guess you don't really want an asterisk next to it too. But you can kind of understand where I'm coming from, though, that to a lot of people this is going to be a massive bone of contention, obviously, and you mentioned that yourself. But if you are a fan of Spezia, then you are going to want to celebrate that. It's very much part of your club's heritage and history, But I mean, before that, things were getting a little bit murky. They changed name again to Union Sportiva Palermo Juventina. So again, we're seeing this kind of really loose link to Turin and Juventus. But I mean, again, it's difficult to say whether this was a byproduct of Mussolini's changes that swept football in Italy at the time, or if it was anything that the club actually decided to do themselves.
Listen, you've done the research. I'm just I'm a Roma fan from Italian football, and big Italian football nut, and Palermo is sort of my second team as such. My understanding was that when the war finished, they recreated and merged with a team called Juventus Palermo. I could be wrong, but I think they did the family tree then merged with a.
But they also started playing in different colours at this point, I think, as well.
So I'm not sure. So I think they took that club's colours and they started playing in blue for a few years, which was the Juventino club's colours.
Yeah. I think that's what happened. I mean, again, it's a little bit murky. Probably need to dive into it a little bit more, which is fine. I'm more than happy to do that. But just for a kind of base of the history of the club, I think that's what happened. But at this stage, again, going back to the World War II period, we hit 1942. The club entered Serie B, but as World War II was just starting, the leagues presumably went through quite a lot of change.
I don't know. There was loads of. It's when the Italian league was like run by different. We got like the FA, the Scottish FA, the Irish FA, different FAs. But the Italian FA was lots of different fractions, and they had their own leagues, and they then came up with stupid rules like there can only be teams from certain play. You can only have one team from each region in the top league. So there were teams getting relegated and demoted, even though they'd finished mid-table, for example, just because you couldn't be in the top league. Like Atalanta at the time, where they'd been a massive Yola club, but back in that period, they could never get promoted because you had the Team Milan teams that were so close to their doorstep. It was just one of them things. So possibly it was around that.
Got you. Okay, well, I think that makes a bit more sense. I mean, obviously, if Spezia won the league, then presumably there was a National League at that time. But, that could probably be a whole other podcast episode on these interwar leagues and the types of clubs and the types of teams themselves that would have actually won trophies. And as was mentioned in the Defiant book by Chris Lee that I'd mentioned beforehand, there's also a huge subject around the football players who fought with resistance movements or for the regime as well. So huge, an entire other subject area there that I'm sure we'll delve into in time. But after World War II, Palermo returned to their pink colours and also returned to Serie A, which was good for them. Obviously, kind of reclaiming their identity by taking their pink colours, which is something that was quite unique, and getting back to the top flight, which must have been massive for the people of Palermo and Sicily as well to see that. But this period of football in Italy is probably best associated with the dominance of Turin-based football clubs, particularly Juventus, but also Torino, who sadly became one of football's greatest tragedies, didn't they?
So that Torino team was just unbelievable. If anybody wants to look at a record, and it probably it predates a couple of similar disasters we've seen since, but that whole Torino team was wiped out returning from a European game they played. It's got the Sibiga disaster, which is the name of a church, a hillside in Turin. The whole team was lost, but they were just the most dominant team.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. Again, another club which could have its own podcast episode, and even that disaster in that team could have their own podcast episode as well. I actually think someone's published a book on the team that sadly died during the Superga disaster as well, so please do keep an eye out for that one. I think it's out in Pitch Publishing too. In terms of Palermo in the early 50s, they cemented themselves as a lower table Serie A side basically. But then in the 60s, they became a bit of a yo-yo club. They spent time between Serie A and Serie B. When they were in Serie A, they never really spent much time outside of the bottom fringes of the table, to be completely honest. So very much a yo-yo club during then. But then we enter the 70s, where they did spend most of their time in Serie B, but as well as reaching 2 Coppa Italia finals while in Serie B, it became probably the most pivotal decade for Palermo in terms of their history and the modern period that we'll eventually come on to cover.
70s is a big period for them, which was when Renzo Barberia became the chairman or owner, I think, of the club, and obviously the stadium's named after. So that was probably a key. Even though the team wasn't doing amazingly well, he's a big name.
Yeah, massive name. But of course, being in the second tier and getting to 2 Coppa Italia finals, but that's still incredible, isn't it?
Bologna and Juve lost them both.
Yeah, that's right, mate. Bologna and Juve, that's good knowledge. And as you mentioned there, they didn't win either of them, sadly. I guess that you could probably consider this period as one of the club's first golden eras, I guess. Obviously didn't win anything, as we said, but to be in the second tier and get to 2 Coppa Italia finals is nothing short of impressive, and they got one of their most iconic owners on board, and the stadium's named after him, so this is a huge period in the club's history. However, sadly, they eventually fell into Serie C and were expelled from the league, interestingly, so that's another element and another layer added to this story. But then they reformed during the 80s. Again, their fans and a lot of prominent supporters and politicians are continuing this narrative that the club has one sort of bloodline running through it, if you like, and this is just a continuation of the club, not necessarily a separate one. So the reform during the 80s, and it wasn't until really the 90s and early 2000s when someone at the club decided to put plans in place with the aim of getting the club back into Serie A. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that person, Adrian? Because this is where our story really kicks into gear.
100%. It's probably worth a step back in that they had a little bit of success in the 90s because for kit nerds like me, they had the lovely badge on the kit for a year where they won the Italian Cup for Serie C clubs. So again, being a Roma fan, that's quite interesting, is actually they were taken over in the late 90s by Franco Sensi, who owned Roma. He took over Roma in 1992 and was still owner of Roma when they won the Scudetto in the early 2000s and into the 2000s. He's the owner of Roma. He also, the rules in Italy were very different, right? So he owned Roma for a long time. He also owned Foggia for a couple of years, I think. I'm a bit sketchy in terms of how long. And he bought or took over I think the phrase they used was he was the custodian of Palermo from 2000 to 2002. So he actually got promotion from C to B, and it just went nuts at this point.
It does, yeah. So this is the point where Maurizio Zamprini takes over as chairperson of Palermo.
Otherwise known as the coach eater.
Yeah, that's right. For reasons that will become clear, he was otherwise known as the coach eater, as Adrian said there. That's a cracking way to put him. Yeah, so he had a bit of a fondness for sacking and hiring coaches. We'll touch on that a bit more later. But am I right in saying it was around 2002, 2001, 2002 that he took over?
So Zamparini, if anybody owns any Venezia shirts, so he was the owner of Venezia throughout the 90s, and I'm not sure he's a popular owner, although he did take them up to Serie A. But if you've got a Venezia shirt during the 90s, the sponsor is probably, I think it's Emizata is how you pronounce it, which is a big department store across Italy, and that was his business. That's how he got into football. He actually bought Venezia and then merged them with their closest and fiercest rivals. Rory, I can see you're wearing a Venezia shirt right now. Beautiful shirt that I think probably Nike shirts are much better than the Kappa shirts, but that's more for our podcast than yours. But the orange that you've got on your shirt there actually relates to the original club the other club in Venezia, which is like the mainland bit. If anybody knows Venezia, it's basically a large group of islands. Venezia, the actual football team, is like the most southerly bit, Lamas. And he actually bought both clubs and merged them together, which I don't think made him very popular. Although he took them to Serie A, he bought Palermo. Palermo is the fifth biggest city in Italy. Like, it's huge. And I think he was basically chasing the potential there. He saw, big, much bigger fan base, people that can go to the games, revenue streams and all that. It's the way to go. It's a pretty crazy story about how he bought Palermo. He basically swapped, and I know you've looked at this for his Turkish clubs, but he did effectively swap Venezia with Palermo to the point at which, when he took them over, they were both doing pre-season in the same region of Italy, and he took a coach load of Venezia players across to Palermo's training camp and said, right, this is my new team. You're now playing here. And there were 10 Venezia players that went across during that period. I'm talking big players. So I think said, a Napoli fan said, Di Napoli. Miniero is a player that a lot of people know that played for Venezia, striker. Yeah, he took 10 of his players across and said, right, now you're playing for my new team, which is Palermo. And actually, I don't know how true this is, but he chucked 6 or 7 players the other way that he just basically thought was shit. And he basically just moved the balance sheet around and was like, right, this is my new club. This is where the good players are going. And this is where the players I don't want to go in. Venezia went bankrupt, and Palermo were set up with a new club, a new infrastructure, and hundreds of managers.
Yeah, literally almost hundreds of managers. It was, we'll talk about the final numbers later, but it was fucking crazy, I think, but the final number, what that was. Despite the chaos, did actually bring a pretty extended period of success. Like, you can't deny that he wasn't successful. He chucked a shitload of money at the club, but it was a pretty good time for the fans and the players as well. You could probably even say it was Palermo's best golden era. Certainly the one that's most remembered. I mean, obviously by fans of my age and my generation, probably. Even went on a European run in the 05-06 season in the UEFA Cup. Reached the round of 16, which is pretty good going. Eventually losing out to Schalke. So, it's not as if it was a pretty horrible period for the fans, despite all of this chaos going on outside, or off the field, I should say,
Zamparini was prolific, and he earned that nickname, the coach. I think so. In the 16 years that he owned Palermo in various guises, whether it be chairman or owner, he sacked 45 managers in 16 years. It was 45 sackings, 34 different managers, because he would regularly bring managers backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. In one season, he sacked 2 managers after they had won a match. in the 15-16 season, he sacked 2 managers after they'd won the game, and he actually went through 8 managers in that season alone. Absolutely incredible stuff. But he was chucking money into the club. I mean, people don't realise this. If you go back and you look at the transfer fees when he took over the club, in I think it was promoted. They got promoted in 03-04 under Francesco Guidolin. And you look at the money he was spending. I mean, they signed Luca Toni. Yeah, I think it was 4 million euros at the time. This is 20 years ago. A Serie B club signing a striker for 6. It was 6 million euros. A huge sum. A huge sum. And you actually go through that whole period and look at the money he spent. And he spent a lot of money. Some on good players, some on big transfer fees, big outlays. But yeah, 100%. They made Europa League in their second season. Their first season in Serie A, they finished like in 6th or 7th, which is massive, huge achievement. But the 6th biggest city in Italy, it's a 1-club city. Turin's bigger than 2 teams. Milan's bigger than 2 teams. So actually, is he looking at this potential and thinking this could and should be a huge club, and he's put that investment into it? Crazy time, absolutely crazy time.
Yeah, it was a mental time. I mean, I remember it. Again, different context, but it was the same in Scotland. That was the Setanta era and stuff like that, and you had clubs like Dundee signing Kinesia, and you had all sorts of weird deals going on and money being splurged everywhere. So it was mental. But then, of course, Calciopoli broke in the news, the match fixing and bribery scandal, which rocked Italy in 2006 and continued into 2008, roughly, if I remember correctly.
But then that's another really interesting story in the link to Juve that you guys should definitely investigate, because when Calciopoli came through and Juventus had to play some games away from home in Europe, they played the games in Palermo, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, that is actually crazy when you think about it. I never knew that myself. You see these links to Juventus and Turin, you see these links to Juventus and Palermo and Palermo and Turin kind of cropping up here and there. So I think it's definitely enough to merit looking into it at the very least and doing a wee bit of further research on that. Palermo qualified for Europe a few more times and then reached their 3rd Coppa Italia final, losing out to Inter on that occasion. And then in 2011-2012, they went on their last European venture but got put out in the 3rd qualifying round by FC Thun from Switzerland. It's a bit of a shock result, is it not?
From unofficial sources that I've been told to relay this, they were not taking the competition seriously. They didn't want to be in it, because there was that mixed time where sort of certain clubs didn't want to be in Europe, and I've been asked to put forward the narrative that they weren't taking it seriously.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's just interesting to hear. No, I mean, normally it's one of those things. It's a bit of a cop out or an excuse if a club suffers a shock defeat like that. But I do remember there being a bit of a period of time when the UEFA Cup, just before or just after it rebranded, when some clubs are like, okay, this is the lesser tournament, so we're not really that bothered. So maybe there is some truth in that, but I'll take your word for it. During this time, the club, they went through a power of managers. They always went through a power of managers during the Zampian era, and they got relegated and promoted again, and astoundingly spent 12 million euros on signing Paulo Dybala, which is an insane amount of money for a club of Palermo stature, which at that time was newly promoted and effectively Serie B infrastructure.
They were regularly throwing money at players. They were signing goalkeepers in 2012 for 9 million euros, which is it's a lot of money like back then for that sort of size club. So Dybala wasn't cheap. They might have sold him for good money, and did sell some players for good money, but
yeah, it's a huge amount of money, and obviously, as we see with other clubs across the world, normally when a new owner comes in, you've got this kind of issue where there's loads of managers coming and going, spotlight's obviously on them, and if a lot of money's being spent, it's normally indicative that something bad is going to happen quite soon, which of course it did. But at this point, the club had become a bit of a circus, really. There's no two ways about it. They'd hired something like 34 managers in 16 years or something daft. And eventually the club was put up for sale, which I can imagine many of the fans would have been quite happy about, or was that the case?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit, I'm trying to think for years, it gets very sketchy. Are we about 2014-ish here?
2018 we're on now, mate, 2018.
So the original offer, I think he's an American Italian, heads it up. But the Palermo fans were a little bit resistant. They actually made this guy get a Palermo tattoo to prove that he was serious. So the ultras sat him down, took him out for a beer, and because I think he was like a TV comedian, so they actually sat him down and made him get a tattoo to prove he was serious about coming into Palermo. Made him get a Palermo tattoo, which he got. By all accounts, the guy had a lot of tattoos, so probably didn't even notice. But the money never arrived.
Was there not something though that the deal had fallen through, or that the offer had expired, or something like that as well, if I remember correctly?
I think the offer was accepted. I could be, again, there's various versions of this. I think the offer was accepted. He was appointed chairman or president or something for a little while, but the money just never appeared. It just never came in.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, that's a common tale with a lot of the football clubs that we look at and that we research and the guys have written about. When new owners are appointed, think if they're talking a big game and it seems too good to be true, then the likelihood is it probably is. I mean, look at the likes of Chester, Aldershot, Hereford, just to name three of the sort of bigger clubs from England that have went defunct because of similar reasons, dodgy owners. I mean, it is a massive red flag, but if the club is in a bit of a desperate state, then sometimes they're willing to take that risk to see what happens. But again, in my opinion, if owners are talking a big game and it seems too good to be true, then the likelihood that it is. But sadly for the fans, the circus continues right up until sort of pre-COVID time, around 2018, 2019, is that right?
No, it's just 17, 18. They sold the club again. So they sold the club towards the end of the year 2017. So they were top of the league or maybe second this is quite interesting if you Google it and watch the videos. They sold it to a company called Global Futures Sport Entertainment London Limited, right? And literally, if you were going to put some bullshit into Google Translate around what sounds like a good company, let's translate it to English, that's kind of what you come out with in terms of a company to set up. And not only did they do this, but then they paid for a consultant. And when they announced that they had taken over Palermo, they had an Englishman sat in front of a microphone. The man they put up initially as a consultant was David Platt of Juventus, Bari, England, Arsenal. So if you YouTube it, you can see David Platt speaking in eloquent Italian. Obviously, he hasn't got a clue what's going on. He's not really answering any of the questions. He's asked who's behind this fund and what's going on. He's none the wiser really. But so I think they took over. They did genuinely take over the club and bought it. But by February, basically, the transfer window came and they didn't sign or sell a single player. And I think by the end of February, they were gone. And the Richardson guy you mentioned came out being the president or the chairman. And he basically cited that they'd found all sorts of irregularities and problems that didn't come out in their due diligence. Because they bought the club, I think it was for like €10 or some stupid nominal amount. But it came out that they found all sorts of issues. So the team finished third. So they then got bought by a group, and the names might be right. It was all I remember. It's a group called Horror, I think is the group. It's a Sicilian guy and it's an American Sicilian. So it was two individuals who bought it. Again, the club disappeared for a year. There was a few backers that came in to buy the club, and I think the mayor basically hosted an auction to see who was going to buy the club. They are still, I think, 15 or 20% stakeholders today. But of course, last year, I mean, maybe their money woes have disappeared forever, because last year they had Citigroup come in and buy them. So you've still got that local ownership in there.
Yeah, I think the consensus at this point was that it had become all very shady, all cloak and dagger, and the club and the fans really suffered for it at the end of the day. I think it's fair to say that Palermo probably became a bit of a laughingstock in Italian football at that time. As you say, nominal amounts like €10 going up for sale, and like these dodgy red flag sports associations coming out. They're having to wheel like superstars out to be their PR, and as you said, he's probably got no idea what's going on. So yeah, it's all just a bit of a farce, really, isn't it?
I think when that first initial offer came in and the money didn't turn up, I think that's when he wanted to go. I mean, it gets tiring sacking all these players, all these managers. It takes its toll. And the guy was addicted to Viagra by all accounts as well. And that's bad for your blood pressure, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, I mean, you see it all too often when owners throw money at clubs and just become complete dictators within the club, as what happened at Palermo. Would probably be fair to say as well that for as much money as he threw into the club, he probably managed to skim a fair bit back into his own pockets, even if the club was riddled with debts and sold for a tenner. At the end of the day, these guys very rarely leave empty-handed, and it's quite reminiscent of other clubs as well. Watford, of course, come to mind. FC Sion in Switzerland, who I think their average is like 2.8 managers per season or something, like just completely ridiculous stuff. And again, it gives him a bit of a weird power trip. And yeah, again, though, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't leave empty-handed, put it that way. But for everything that happened, the club were given a 20-point deduction for financial irregularities. And at this point, this is when the FIGC kind of start getting heavily involved, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, this is just literally every year. The Italian leagues are a mess. The FIGC is like the FA as such for us here. One cool thing, I say cool, it backfires as we can see, is that every year clubs have to apply to enter the league. Even if you finished mid-table in Serie B, you have to apply by a certain date with all the paperwork and with a business plan to prove you've got the financial backing and all the insurance and things to see you through to the end of the season. And every single year it causes carnage. I mean, this year, for example, Lecco won the playoff to go from Serie C to Serie B. They basically been told after about 2 appeals that they can't play in Serie B because they haven't got the infrastructure, even though they have got a stadium that will be ready after 4 games and they found somewhere to ground share. But they were told they handed in a document 24 hours too late. This is still playing on, but as it stands, they won the playoffs. They won't be in Serie B. Reggiana, who finished in 7th-ish place, didn't pay a tax bill. And they've been told they can't play in Serie B next season either. So we're now looking at Brescia and Perugia, who were stone cold relegated, and Brescia lost a playoff to stay up. Both look like they're going to be playing in Serie B next year because of the type of regulation that just forms Italian football. And this happens every single year, right? This is this year. And this is the kind of regulation that, in one version of the Palermo story, it's the kind of regulation where they were the victims of this and they ended up in Serie D because of this type of bureaucracy. Probably know there's another version of events where actually it probably was the right thing, because I say probably, there might have been issues where they actually didn't have the finances and they couldn't have competed, and actually the league did the right thing by not allowing them in. And
it does come across as one of those very, very bureaucratic things that is just a nonsense, though, and it seems maybe not universally hated, but a lot of people and a lot of clubs and fans see it as very, very unnecessary that you have to re-register. And a lot of people have actually said that the league use it as a cop-out a lot of the time. They use it as a means to kick clubs out if they feel that the club have maybe overstepped in some way or undermined them in some way. It just seems like a lot of nonsense.
This is where it comes into grey area, and maybe this is one party giving some party doesn't lose face, but they were not relegated because of their league position at the end of the day. They were initially under a penalty, but they appealed that, so they were not relegated due to their league position. They were ultimately not readmitted to the league because of bureaucracy, and I think the most popular accepted version of the story is that they handed in an insurance certificate 24 hours too late. I think is the most accepted version.
Exactly. I mean, it's one part of the story that I know a lot of people have read and been like, come on, Do you know what I mean? I know it's a bit of a double-edged sword because, you know, it's like it's a regulation. So if you're not going to do it properly, then why is it there? If you're going to be too lenient with clubs who don't do it properly, then why are you there and what's your purpose? You can't really seem to be toothless as a regulator and understand that. But at the same time, it's like, you know, surely there are some concessions for this type of thing. But, you know, at the end of the day, they were riddled with financial burdens, and there's a whole load of other contexts behind this. But, you know, it's that kind of bureaucracy that ultimately meant they had to start again in Serie D. And interestingly, you know, we mentioned earlier that people were saying that the club had one continuous bloodline running through it. At this point, the mayor of Palermo, so it's official politicians and very prominent people, the mayor of Palermo actually refers to the club for the very first time as a Phoenix club, which from the perspective of club identity and fan identity is quite significant, because that's basically an acknowledgement that there's been a break in the club's history, and this club is seen as the spiritual, historic and perhaps legal successor as well, but isn't the same as the previous club.
Everything previously has just been, it's the same family, it's just a reinvention of its next generation. But at this stage, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was commonly spoken about that this is the Phoenix of.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the mayor mentioning, the mayor referring to them as that, I think went a long way. Obviously, I know a lot of fans won't agree with that. A lot of fans will see it as a continuation, but I think the Phoenix aspect is really important. And I don't want to go too much into the corruption side of things, because I think a lot of it, although there is weight in the allegations, I think a lot of it can kind of go into conspiracy theories and tinfoil hat kind of stuff. But if there are people who are looking to maintain a certain agenda over clubs like that, then they're going to want to refer to them as Phoenix clubs. They're going to want to try and push that as much as possible. Don't think it would be so far-fetched to say that perhaps the mayor was involved in that. I'm not too sure, but I think, and I don't know if it's one of those things. If I was a Palermo fan, I would not obviously view them as a Phoenix club, but I can imagine a lot of Palermo fans probably don't. But from the outside looking in, it's hard to argue that they're not.
I mean, it's like a company law type of thing. I mean, it's a different company entity, but if you're following a bloodline, related to a family tree, it's definitely one and the same club. But most clubs have gone through this sort of change at some point in their history. Palermo, as we just probably reflected on, have been through it a lot of times. And probably more recently, and they're a massive club, massive city, but their story is probably not too different to most teams that most people listening probably support or relate to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think most people will have experienced it at some point in their lifetime as a supporter. The club will have had some kind of financial trouble, or at the very least had to rein in what they were spending. So, it's something that every fan will relate to and will have had experience at some point. But in terms of Palermo, they're on the rise again, though, and not so long ago managed to navigate the absolute minefield that is the Serie C playoff, which is really pretty impressive, actually, when you think about how incredible those playoffs can be.
Oh, the Serie C is absolutely, to be honest, you need a podcast to describe that. But Serie C split into three Girones, 1, 2, and 3, and it's basically north, middle, south of Italy, just to try and take into account the travelling that needs to be involved. But what happens is basically, if you win your Girone, 1, 2, or 3, you get promoted. Every team that finishes basically second to about 16th, it feels like, in each of those 3 Girones, goes into the most epic playoff you've ever seen in your life, where you if you start at the very beginning, and you start depending on your league position, if you start at the beginning, you've probably got to play another 18 games to get promoted. It's nuts. It's crazy. Brilliant. But Palermo went through most of that journey, and very quickly they got themselves back up to Serie B. Quite a fairy tale, really.
Yeah, I guess that's one word for it. They certainly done their bit. It must have been all right being in Serie C with the backing and resource that they had available to them, though. But, of course, you still need to do the job that's in front of you. You still need to beat who's in front of you, don't you? They've done not bad since then, though. I think they just missed out in the playoffs last time as well.
And just missed out. I would imagine, listen, Serie B is a seriously competitive league. Well, not first time, a long time. It has been for a couple of years, but it's a seriously competitive league next year with a lot of teams with actually a lot of money for Italy. Italian money is very different. Look at TV money. they're going to be going for promotion. You know, they're going to be expecting to finish in the top six because of the resources, because of the fan base, because they got the City Group behind them now. And listen, the City Group have not put silly behind them yet, right? So they've still got sponsorship deals and things like that going on with smaller businesses that they're honouring. So I don't think we've seen that sort of level of crazy investment yet. But could we at one point? I mean, like I say, if they get promoted, they are the sixth biggest city in Italy. In a city that's only got one team in a peninsula, really, you know, Catania. You need to do a show on Catania one day as well, right? But you know, they've got a huge geographical catchment. Yeah, a lot of footfall around the world as well. You know, the migration of Sicily around the world. I imagine a lot of those people identify with Palermo as their team as well. So, you know, Serie A is a difficult league now, and you look at the money that's spent, and actually, if a team the size of Palermo with backing could get into Serie A, and spend a bit of money, there's no reason why they couldn't finish top half and challenge again, like we've seen them do in the early noughties, and we saw them do in the mid-teens. You know, you've got teams like Roma that haven't spent a penny for 2 years. If Palermo went up with the backing they've got, could they spend 30-40 million and improve that squad and challenge for Europe in top half compared to some of the teams that hang on every year? I think there's huge potential, and it's probably that potential that going all the way back to 2002 when Zamperino took his 10 players on a coach across the road to go and take them to sign for Palermo. It's probably that potential, right?
I don't think it's. I think you're right. I think it could happen if they go back up. I think maybe the City Group are just waiting for that to happen so that then they can make it happen more or less. I mean, the other team that kind of sprung to mind, maybe that hasn't happened, but again, the ownership's completely different. The owner of Watford still own Udinese? Is there still a link there? Because
it's father and son. It's father and son, which you know, apparently keeps them out of some of these absolutely crazy rules. But I think when you look at the last 30 signings Watford have made, I could be making this up, and I'm not making it up, I could be exaggerating, but you know, 30 of their last transfers to and from, half of them have involved Udinese and vice versa.
Because I remember that at one point Gerard Deulofeu was meant to be the next big thing, and then I think Watford went down. They sent him out on loan to Udinese, and then he's just stayed there. And not that he's a great player, absolutely fantastic footballer still, but it was just so weird because they were like, yeah, we're going to send him on loan there. He'll be back, don't worry. And then they signed him, and it's like, there's obviously something really dodgy going on here, but it's a bit nuts. But obviously, I'm going to presume they don't have the same financial backing as the City Group, and that's why, you know, Udinese haven't tried to make their way up in the same fashion that we say Palermo would. So
they definitely got muscle, and there's definitely muscle that works between them and Watford in terms of manipulating the Championship and potentially getting better players when Watford in the Premier League getting better players into Serie A. But it's definitely it's not Middle Eastern money.
Yeah. I mean, you can only hope as well that football on Sicily as a whole continues to grow, because it's crazy to think that for a long time Sicily haven't had a club representing them in Serie A.
100%. But you got to give a shout out to Trapani as well, who another, probably the fourth, I don't know, rank their clubs. And again, recently have had their troubles. I think they were Serie B and went bust probably 3 or 4 years ago. So massive fan base, big city.
Yeah, they're definitely one I'd like to look into. Same with the other island regions who are a part of Italy. As I said earlier, they all have their own distinct and very strong identities and heritages as well, so there's always a good story there to be told. Cagliari, one of the ones I'd love to look into personally on Sardinia. Just before we finish up, how do you see Palermo doing in the upcoming campaign?
Yeah, so they've made some good signings. I wouldn't say they've splashed the cash as such, but they brought in a very experienced midfielder and to sit in the middle of the park in terms of Insigne, not the striker, but his brother, who's won promotion a couple of times from Serie B, with Frosinone and Benevento. I think he won promotion with before, so he signed. Mancusio's come across as well, a very experienced Serie B striker. It's got promotion a couple of times, so they're bringing in stalwarts, and they've also brought in Italy's next big prospect in terms of goalkeeping. Donnarumma's probably only 24, 25 now. He's probably Italy's goalkeeper for the next 15 years. Yeah,
absolutely terrifying.
But they brought in a young Italian goalkeeper who was part of the under-19 team that got to the World Cup final. They brought in a goalkeeper there, so they definitely strengthened the squad. And it was a good squad anyway. They just struggled for consistency a little bit last year, so they're going to be batting for promotion. But listen, this is a really, really tough Serie B this year. Like I said, Como threw money at it. And particularly second half of last year, they threw a lot of money at it, and it's going to be really interesting. Really interesting. The teams that came down have all got money as well, but they'll be pitching for promotion, and it'd be great to see a club that size, that heritage, a story we all learn about, and that colour. Like, we love seeing this. Those pink kits are iconic.
Yeah, you're spot on. Iconic is certainly the word for it. It'd be great to see them back in the top flight too. Just there's something about a great kit and the top flight. It's like they deserve to be there, So yeah, hopefully they can do the business and get themselves back up. But I think that'll do us for tonight. I think I speak for both of us when I say we want Palermo to be back in the Serie A as soon as possible. Adrian, thank you very much for joining me tonight. If any of our listeners want to check out Adrian's other work, particularly with football kit collecting, you can find him over at FutbolShirtalia. We'll put this in the show notes and any promotional posts we put out on our social media. Of course, you can also find them at They Think Kits all over, which is the football kit podcast and media outlet. Really the go-to one, especially on X. The output's absolutely incredible, and as I said, I wouldn't have known half of the kits in my collection were out there if it weren't for you guys, so thank you very much for bringing me that. Of course, if there's any club topic or area of football history or heritage you want us to cover, please do get in touch. You can DM us on X, which is @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. So please get in touch if there's something that you would like us to cover, even if you just want to chat. Very happy to speak with people, especially when it's about football. But for now, Adrian, say goodbye.
Big night. Big fan of your work, guys, as well.
Thanks very much, mate. Big fan of yours as well. And it's goodbye from me. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.